From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Boeing will build America's next-generation fighter jet, beating Lockheed Martin to win the multi-billion-dollar contract that was announced today by President Trump in the Oval Office. We're joined ahead by Dr. Rebecca Grant from the Lexington Institute. The deal was announced same day Elon Musk paid a visit to the Pentagon, the White House denying reports that he received a briefing on China war plans. We'll turn to geopolitics this evening as the Pentagon seeks reform advice from the Doge. And we'll explore the impact that politics are having on Musk brands like Tesla and X with Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin. Thanks for being with us on the late edition, the Friday edition of Balance of Power with me in Washington once again this evening. Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief, Julie Fine. It's great to have you along, Julie. Another busy day today at the White House.
Another busy day, but happy Friday.
Well, that's true. Happy Friday to you as well. At the White House today, the president was joined by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, announcing Boeing as the winner of a multi-billion-dollar contract to design and build the next generation fighter jet, beating out, as we mentioned, rival Lockheed Martin.
These magnificent planes will be built in the air during my administration over the next couple of years. It's ready to go. They've already built much of what has to be built in terms of production, including the sheds. We'll ensure that the USA continues to dominate the skies.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's national security reporter, Dan Flatley. It's great to have you at the table, Dan. I know that a lot of folks in these circles like yourself saw this coming. The significance, though, of this contract, the war that it's preparing for, this is a jet that can do something that the rest of our arsenal cannot.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. I think, obviously, our reporting highlights the fact that the U.S. is really looking at China and the Pacific region with this project. And one of the reasons is that this jet is designed to fly with drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, which is something that has been in development for a long time, and obviously drones have been used in wars now for a couple of decades, but they're getting more advanced, and especially in that region, we expect them to play a big role. So this is a very interesting announcement, and $20 billion over a course of several years to field this jet.
And $20 billion, though, at a time where we are seeing some cuts in the government. But Pentagon seems to be doing fine when you look at this instance.
Yeah, it's sort of an old saw on Capitol Hill that nobody wants to touch the defense budget, and so I think that for projects like this that are deemed to be of a very high national security value, I think we can be rest assured that they'll be safe for the time being. But there are certainly other areas that DOGE may be looking to cut.
Dan Flatley, thank you so much for being with us. And staying on this conversation, we'd like to turn right now to Dr. Rebecca Grant, Vice President of Defense Programs at the Lexington Institute. Dr. Grant, thank you so much for being with us. Let's talk a little bit about this F-47, the president talking about how it can fly with drones, how special it is. However, is this the jet that can prevent a war with China?
Well, it should be. And don't forget, China late last year flew 2 new stealth aircraft of its own, really forcing our hand. But President Trump has made the biggest decision on an American fighter plane in 25 years. This is the first 6th-generation fighter. We've got a 6th-generation bomber, the B-21. But this plane, as he says, is really better than anything else out there. It's stealthy. It's got a lot of information connections. And this is the plane they need out in the Pacific to deter China and face them down if necessary.
Interesting. So this replaces the F-22. It's being positioned as a drone platform the way that Dan Flatley described. Is that going to be the future? Because we hear, even from Elon Musk, that there's less need than ever for manned weapons platforms. This is a hybrid of both.
Yes, well, it turns out the Air Force knows that we do still need a manned fighter, but one that is equipped to work with drones. And those drones can do everything from electronic warfare to maybe carrying additional weapons. Those drones are in development as well. So you're really seeing the next phase of war. What this fighter also does, President Trump implied it's got a Mach 2 speed. We know it's going to have good range and probably very advanced propulsion, a lot of sophisticated composite shaping. This is something that only America can pull off, and congratulations to the Boeing team that's designed this.
And, you know, obviously Boeing wanted this, Lockheed wanted it. Why do you think Boeing finally pulled this out and got it?
Well, in the end, it's going to have come down to how the various aircraft scored on the test range. We know this Boeing craft has been flying for almost 5 years. The president told us it had great numbers. That means it did very well in its operational evaluations. It's real hard for enemy air defenses to see. And then it would have all that combination of sophisticated electronics, the ability to upgrade it, the ability to get it into production quickly. And as President Trump said, he's ordered a lot. All that goes into the decision to award the contract.
I want you to cut through some of the controversy that we're hearing today in Washington involving Elon Musk, because this is being announced as you've got a massive pushback from the White House on his visit to the Pentagon. All the antennas went up last night when the New York Times suggested that Elon Musk was going to go to the Pentagon for essentially a secret briefing on war plans for China. The president, after going on Truth Social about this, addressed it directly today in the Oval Office. Here's what he said.
We don't want to have a potential war with China, but I can tell you if we did, we're very well equipped to handle it. But I don't want to show that to anybody. But certainly you wouldn't show it to a businessman. Elon has businesses in China, and he would be susceptible perhaps to that. But it was such a fake story.
He has businesses in China, as the president said. He also runs one of the most important defense contractors out there in SpaceX. I'm piling a bunch of issues on top here to make this real hard on you. The fact of the matter is he had denigrated Lockheed and the F-35 project. There are questions about whether he weighed in on whether to hire Boeing for this, even though this was a long-term bidding process. You can speak to that. There are also questions about what he's doing at the Pentagon, Doctor. What do you make of it?
Well, first on the F-47, it's one on the merits. Elon's been talking trash about manned fighters for 5 years at least. But, hey, I think the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Elon, knows a little bit more than Elon about that. So we see this good decision. I don't see anything going on there with F-47. Now, why was Elon at the Pentagon? To my mind, it's because he's a very innovative businessman. You know, President Trump has picked a lot of innovators from the private sector for his positions or his selection for the Air Force. Troy Mankus from the space world, but very innovative as well. I think they were looking at business plans. And, hey, there are war plans and war plans. Did they talk about China? I don't know. I think they talked about the really important topic of more innovative business practices at the Pentagon.
But you do certainly have the optics of this when you have Elon Musk at the Pentagon today when this announcement comes out.
Yes, but I think we have to give the sway here to President Trump and to Secretary of Defense Hegseth. This is his first big acquisition decision. And clearly, manned fighters have won the day. And that's because the Air Force knows, and the Navy as well, that you right now still need that combination of manned platforms and the drones. That's what's going to get us to dominance over China and deterrence of China.
Manned fighters have won the day, says Rebecca Grant. With that said, what happens to the Raptor and the F-35 programs?
Well, the Raptor will be with us for a while. They were deployed to the Middle East, and we're going to be leaning on the Raptor for quite a while, at least through this decade. Eventually, it will retire. You know, it is a 40-year-old design, though it's the best of our fighters. The F-35, that one is going great guns. We have 20 different allies that are partners in that program. We will have F-35s around for many decades to come. Very hot production line, important upgrades to the engine, the cooling, and the weapons. And the F-35 is absolutely a mainstay for NATO and a lot of our allies in the Pacific. So they'll be on the team.
Why a new fighter jet at the end of the day? With all the technology that we have, I know we talked about China, but with all the technology we have, do we really need it at all?
Such an excellent question. Yes, we do. China has spent years trying to lock us out through their electronic systems and their long-range systems. And the job of this new fighter is to break up that defense bubble and to be able to get in and hold Chinese targets at risk. That gives us deterrence, and it also gives the president options in the event of a crisis. Given what China is putting up in the Pacific, we absolutely need this F-47, for sure.
This is happening at the same time procurement reform lands at the Pentagon, but also a different view when it comes to more unmanned drones, also sea-based unmanned vehicles, cyber weapons. Is this all part of the same toolkit, or is this kind of a vestige of a Cold War approach at the Pentagon?
No, it's all part of the new toolkit, and what the community calls sixth generation, or President Trump calls level 6. Part of that is this ability to incorporate more information. And also, these now have been digitally designed. They can go to production faster. And hey, I've got a hint for you. This is not the last secret fighter plane. I'm told that the Navy also has one in the works. And we may see a decision on a carrier-based sixth-generation fighter sometime this year.
How about that? When does this one get in the air, by the way? Do we have a sense?
This one's been in the air as a demonstrator.
In deployment.
Deployment, I would say we're a little ways out. They are going to go as quick as they can.
2030?
But it has to go through, I'm sure they'd love to have it towards the end of this decade. It's got to go through some operational test and production, but maybe quicker than we thought.
It's really great to have you back with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Rebecca Grant. She's Vice President of Defense Programs at the Lexington Institute, with us on Bloomberg. U.S. officials coming up, heading back to the negotiating table next week in Saudi Arabia. We're going to take a look at this with Jane Harman, former chair of the Commission on National Defense Strategy. She's straight ahead on Balance of Power, on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I believe we're going to have pretty soon have a full ceasefire, and then we're going to have a contract. And the contract's being negotiated, the contract in terms of dividing up the lands, et cetera, it's being negotiated as we speak.
President Trump in the Oval Office today on the latest ceasefire negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Peace talks are set to resume in Saudi Arabia on Monday, where U.S. officials will meet separately with representatives from Ukraine and Russia. Here with more is Jane Harman, former chair of the Commission on National Defense Strategy. Jane, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Julie.
I want to begin with next week. Obviously, this is a much different chapter than the one we saw a few weeks back when there was the meeting between the presidents. Now, however, they're starting from square one. President Trump saying that a Ukraine deal on natural resources should be soon. What do you think will be the first thing that happens when you finally get these two sides together again?
Very unclear at this point. Drawing up a contract sounds like a real estate deal. And what we're really talking about is whether a sovereign country that was invaded unlawfully by Russia has to give up land in a contract. Who is drawing up that contract, and whether doing that, if it even would consider that, is going to protect the remaining country. Nothing about that I'm hearing, at least not yet, some kind of a NATO force or other force along the border to prevent Russia from doing what it has done every time it has agreed to the sovereign borders of Ukraine, which is to invade Ukraine. Nothing about that. And the Ukrainian people, I don't think, want this. I don't think Europe wants this. I read that the latest Gallup poll shows that Americans want our support for Ukraine. So I heard what you said. I heard about energy facilities, et cetera. Last I looked, Russia was bombing the Zaporizhzhia region of Ukraine, which is where its largest nuclear facility, sadly controlled by Russia, is. Trump has suggested that maybe the U.S. would take over that facility. The Ukrainians have rejected that, right in the center of their country. And, let's know they gave up their nukes in 1994 in exchange for Russian respect for their sovereignty. And where are they now? So I don't see a ceasefire that's a serious ceasefire or a contract in Ukraine's near future.
I'm trying to follow the bead on all of this here, Jane. And by the way, we're hearing from President Trump right now. He's leaving the White House. So in the driveway, telling reporters good conversations on Russia and Ukraine today. It's unclear exactly who they were talking to, presumably in advance of the talks in Saudi Arabia next week. But you mentioned the nuclear plant. We talked about that with the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, last evening. Also, the idea of a minerals deal, because I thought one had replaced the other. We moved away from the minerals deal, and we were going to start investing in energy infrastructure. Jana, it sounds like everything is still on the table. Here's what Secretary Wright told us about this pending minerals deal we've heard a lot about in Ukraine.
We often use this misnomer term, natural resources. Those resources have been underground for millions of years and they haven't benefited anyone. I call them natural materials. They only become resources when technology, capital, and human activity brings them out of the ground and turns them into resources. But to have the United States as your partner to develop materials that have been sitting there for a long time unused, that's upside to Ukraine, it's upside to the United States, and of course it's a joining together of the nations.
So, Jane, I'm trying to figure it out. Does the minerals deal then unlock the partial ceasefire on energy and infrastructure? We asked him about whether there'd be any interest by an American company in buying Zaporizhzhia. You said they hadn't heard from anyone yet. So how does all of this work together?
Well, I'm not a geologist, so I can't really tell you what minerals are going where. But last time I looked, Zelensky was in the White House ready to sign a deal with the United States about minerals. And if the meeting hadn't blown up, it was extremely unfortunate. And I think that the handling of that meeting was extremely unfortunate by the United States. Then we would have that deal. The Zaporizhzhia thing is different. Zaporizhzhia is a nuclear facility, the largest in Ukraine, which has been seriously degraded in this illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russia controls the technical facility. Ukrainians live around the facility. And my worry has been that if there's any more bombing in the region, the whole thing could melt down. And then we would have nuclear material probably in the soil. You know, the energy secretary can explain this better than I can, polluting the whole region. Plus, if there is any, and I don't know why there wouldn't be, nuclear material in the air, and that blows toward Europe, arguably, or at least, possibly, that could count as a Russian trigger of Article 5 by one of the countries that has this pollution over it. So, I mean, it's a very complicated subject, but I think the bottom line here is that we're not getting very far on this ceasefire/deal, which was promised in one day, last I looked, when the president was elected. And I think a huge part of that is the Ukrainians are not full participants. And President Trump is talking about other things with Russia, U.S. investments in energy in Russia, et cetera, and is saying things along the way that really make it hard for the Ukrainians to feel they're being treated as equal participants, which they need to be. This is a deal about their country, their sovereignty. They've been fighting for 3 years, and the losses have been significant. The U.S. promised to help. The U.S. public supports help. The U.S. Congress, if they would only speak up, supports help. Europe supports help. And if this thing goes down wrong, let's understand, Russia won't stay put in whatever the contract says. It will probably, which is the dream of Vladimir Putin, take or retake Ukraine and move on into Europe. And then what? I think that is a huge threat to the United States and a huge threat to our allies in Europe. And by the way, saying that we might not consider having the senior military role in NATO hurts NATO and again puts Ukraine in a less good posture for this negotiation.
Jane, thanks for walking us through it, as always. Jane Harman, former chair of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy. Thanks, as always, for being here on Bloomberg. Coming up, President Trump says reaching the U.S. golden age is going to take some time. How patient are the markets? We'll take a closer look next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's almost impossible for me to say, we've seen the bottom, we can break out of this trading range, and it's time for us to add. It is going to be a losing game at this moment. I would put a much higher probability that we don't have clarity after April 2nd. We won't have a significant outlook for the entire policy program in the U.S. When the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold.
Kate Moore from Citi Wealth speaking to Bloomberg this morning. As we saw a late rally on Wall Street, ending up lifting the stock market, big tech leading the gains here, pulling us out of the red. But anxiety over the economy remains a big theme following disappointing forecasts from companies including FedEx and Nike, both of which are proxies for industries and consumer spending. Joining us with more now, Bloomberg The Close co-anchor Scarlet Fu. We're still back to where we were before the election here, Scarlet. It's great to see you. And April 2nd, as we just heard referred to, come reciprocal tariffs. I suspect we don't have much clarity until then.
We don't have much clarity for them, but this late rally that we saw today saved the U.S. stock market from 5 straight weeks of losses. The S&P 500 opened with a 1% drop, and the NASDAQ 100 was on course for its longest weekly stretch of losses since 2022. But we did see higher than average trading volume because of the expiration of options for the late surge. There was also some dip buying from retail investors. Individual investors plowed more than $12 billion into stocks in the most recent week. And that's notable because the pace of buying was significantly higher than the 12-month average. You know, despite all this, and we haven't had a lot of tariff headlines this week, whipsawing the markets. But as you mentioned, that April 2nd timeline is when everyone is really paying attention to whether we're going to get more volatility. And there's a lot of concern from strategists that as much as we've seen markets stabilize this week, they say it's going to be a rolling recovery. Mike Wilson, Morgan Stanley, says it's unlikely we're going to be making any new highs in the first half of this year. So sentiment has soured. It's stabilized for now, but the lack of visibility going forward really means that companies are paralyzed and can't move forward with their plans. And investors see that and are marking down prices for the time being.
And Scarlett, Joe mentioned this briefly earlier, earnings in Nike and FedEx this week. That's already adding to more uncertainty, which, again, like you said, should get even more questionable next week.
Absolutely. We look at FedEx, for instance, trading at the lowest since October of 2023. It cut its full year guidance again for a third straight quarter, and it blamed inflation as well as uncertain demand for shipments. So this is a company that is exposed to a broad cross-section of the economy. So it really feels like this bellwether. It's feeling the effects of weakening consumer demand, and a great example of how there's this fallout from Donald Trump's ongoing trade war. Another company, of course, that we paid attention to is Nike. It was the biggest decliner in the Dow Industrials, trading at the lowest since March of 2020. It's a special case in that it's in turnaround mode, right? It needs to reset its business. It's going to focus more on sports rather than the casual market. It's trying to rebuild relationships with retail partners. But a big part of that, of course, is that it gets a lot of its goods from Mexico and from China. So it's certainly feeling the effects of the ongoing trade war, and it has been saying that it expects gross margin, a key measure of profitability, to decline sharply in the coming weeks.
Thanks so much. Great to see you, Bloomberg's Scarlet Fu. And coming up, Elon Musk's message to shareholder as Tesla stock plunges nearly 50% in 3 months. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
If you read the news, it feels like, Armageddon. So I was like, I can't walk past the TV without seeing a Tesla on fire. And like, what's going on? Some people, it's like, listen, I understand if you don't want to buy our product, but you don't have to burn it down. That's a bit unreasonable,
Elon Musk last night during an all-staff meeting at Tesla following a string of recent attacks on Tesla vehicles, charging stations, Tesla dealerships. Today on Truth Social, President Trump writing, quote, "I look forward to watching the sick terrorist thugs get 20-year jail sentences for what they're doing to Elon Musk and Tesla." Now, Musk's reassurances and President Trump's anger have become the backdrop here for a tough moment for Tesla's business. Sales are down, returns are up, stock has unwound all of its post-election gains. Elon Musk is getting some help now as a result from the White House, where President Trump, of course, recently showed off the full line of Tesla vehicles. That was followed by an actual buy recommendation by the Secretary of Commerce himself. Listen.
If you want to learn something on this show tonight, buy Tesla. It's unbelievable that this guy's stock is this cheap. It'll never be this cheap again.
It's very difficult for, people in the stock market, especially those that look in the rearview mirror, which is most people. And some people like Kathy Wood at ARK Invest do see the future. So what I'm saying is hang on to your stock.
Hang on to your stock as we bring in Bloomberg Business Week columnist Max Chafkin, our Elon whisperer. Max, it's great to have you. This kind of brand destruction is difficult to reverse. We're looking at groups who are attacking, as we said, vehicles, dealerships, throwing Molotov cocktails. This bunch of Teslas that caught on fire in Las Vegas is pretty wild to watch. How does Elon Musk turn that around?
Yeah, and I honestly think that as upsetting as these, acts of vandalism are, it's actually not the thing that people who are interested in the company should be focused on. What people should be focused on is sales, which are also falling, right? So we're obviously seeing activists and Elon Musk becoming kind of a target for anyone who's mad at anything that's happening with the Trump presidency. But you're also seeing a lot of people just not buying the cars, right? Who are maybe put off by the vibes, and Musk and members of the Trump administration are of course trying to turn that around. You talked about Lutnick, you talked about Trump on the South Lawn doing kind of an infomercial, it seemed, for Tesla, and of course Musk himself having this surprise all hands meeting that was broadcast live, not a normal thing for the company to. It really seemed like he was speaking both to employees, try to get them to keep their heads up, but of course also trying to speak to the broader public, try to remind people, I am more than just the guy who cuts costs for Donald Trump.
Max, I have a question. You often hear about President Trump saying to people that just aren't working out well for him or for his image, we'll see you later. Is there a point when Elon Musk is like, this is really affecting my business? Or is he so into doing what he's doing now that he's so wealthy that he just takes the lump?
Well, I don't think that Musk is going to completely back away from Trumpism, from his support of Donald Trump. I think that the thing to keep an eye on is kind of the relationship between his actions in the White House and what it's doing to Tesla sales and what it's doing to Tesla stock. I could see if the stock dropped a lot more. It's fallen by about 50% since reaching a high in mid-December. If it fell, say, another 50%, you could imagine Musk doing more than just doing an all hands, right? Concluding that, hey, the company needs me, I need to step in. And you're seeing analysts, including analysts who have been very bullish on Tesla, even bullish on the connection between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, starting to say, like, we're reaching a crisis point. Now, Musk, of course, very strong-headed, likes to do things his way. And I also think there are questions about once you've sort of pressed this button, whether you can unpress it. Once you've made your brand this Trump-coded, this connected to such a divisive, a leading politician in either party, whether you can kind of get it back.
Well, the politicization of a brand is really something, Max. You saw the Washington Post reporting the number of Tesla owners trading in their cars surged to a record high in March. In many cases, these were climate-focused liberals who were trying to buy electric cars to be climate-friendly and have something cool to drive around here. The former vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party was talking the other day about not only how great it was the stock was down, but how to use dental floss to remove the Tesla logo from your car. Are we going to end up in a world where Republicans are driving Teslas and Democrats have to pick something else? Does Rivian become the Democratic car? How does this... In some ways, right, that's a positive scenario for Tesla, because, a world where, they sell hundreds of thousands of Cybertrucks, say, or where they're able to reach a lot of customers who don't already have electric cars. If you're really squinting and trying to see a strategy, maybe that's it. That said, as you're saying, Tesla's core customer base does not tend to be like super closely aligned with Donald Trump. Car buyers in general, make these decisions over long periods of time. You don't see car brands doing this, trying to connect their car to politics. It's not like some of these consumer brands that have there's like a right-wing coffee company. I'm not sure there's ever going to be a successful right-wing car company. And the last thing is, this effort to reach
conservatives, maybe to reach like people in red states. It hasn't been panning out. You know, the Cybertruck, which was the big way to do that, it just hasn't sold that many units. It doesn't seem to be hitting it off with car buyers. And as much as Elon Musk is trying to, again, refocus things, maybe pump up investors, he doesn't seem to be trying to address that particular problem. What he's doing instead is saying you got to look way into the future to AI. Like, that is the story that he's telling investors, that this politics thing, even car sales are not going to matter, because ultimately Tesla is going to be selling robots and cyber cabs, driverless taxis, and so on. And that, you know, this will all seem like a distraction one day. Again, very, very speculative, though.
Max, how does he calm the investors that basically think right now he's just doing too many jobs and he's not focused on them?
So the challenge for investors is that, if you look at Tesla's valuation, it is way more highly valued than other car companies. Even with the drop in its stock, it kind of already has like an Elon Musk premium built into it. So it's not like, you know, you could imagine companies where the CEO is in hot water and investors saying, oh, we got to force him out, replace him with somebody else, and that'll fix the stock price. In this case, a lot of the stock price is actually predicated on Elon Musk running Tesla. So they're kind of trapped between the boosters, these like retail investors, many of whom think, you know, Elon Musk can do no wrong, and then maybe more sort of numbers-oriented folks who are looking at the sales, seeing their falling, and then also looking at this long-term brand damage and saying, this is priced like a growth company, but we don't see any growth.
We're only talking about Tesla so far in this conversation. If we add SpaceX to the mix, Max, it gets to be interesting. Elon Musk was at the Pentagon this morning, and the White House was very upset about what they called fake news reports, saying that he was getting some sort of secret briefing on China war plans. But we do have the head of one of the most important government contractors, and I'll add defense contractors, in SpaceX. The conflict of interest is also raising a lot of attention here inside the Beltway.
Yeah, I mean, the China report that appeared in the New York Times and Journal was staggering because, of course, Elon Musk has deep connections with China, and also just because it's surprising that somebody who's not, you know, part of those plans would have access to them. As you said, White House and Musk have denied it. But just the fact of this guy with tens of billions of dollars in government contracts, who clearly is seeking more, having this kind of easy access, you know, to the highest levels of the Pentagon, you know, that is potentially, of course, very good for business. I mean, I'm sure that if you were a competing defense contractor, you'd love to be able to just, you know, stroll over to the White House and, you know, sit at a table with the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, I bet.
But of course, it's also, like a huge potential conflict of interest. I do wonder, too, you know, we saw Tesla's stock go up some today. I think it was up about 5% on the day. You wonder how much of that was investors looking at the all hands, how much of it was looking at Elon Musk's continued access to Donald Trump and kind of making this bet that we've seen investors make for a long time, which is like, this guy has very close access. He can pull strings, you know, with the world's most powerful government. He's going to find ways to make money. He's a resourceful guy. And so in that sense, like, showing the continued alliance, you know, for all the ways in which Trump is polarizing, he is also very valuable to somebody like Elon Musk.
Bloomberg's Matt Chafkin, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate your time on a Friday. Coming up, Elon Musk at the Pentagon is raising red flags around the world. We'll discuss with our signature panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Julie Fine in Washington with a live view of Joint Base Andrews and Air Force One. Just now, about to go wheels up, President Trump on his way back to Mar-a-Lago for the weekend, capping another busy week here in the nation's capital. He took a couple of questions from reporters on his way out of the White House, suggesting that talks were held again today on ending the war in Ukraine. Air Force One now wheels up, as you can see live if you're with us on Bloomberg Radio. Again, now airborne on the way back to Florida. We turn now to our signature panel with a lot to talk about on a Friday. Republican strategist Rick Davis is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, partner at Stone Court Capital, and our Democratic analyst, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, political science professor at Iona University. Great to see you both with us here on a Friday as the president ships off and heads home. Jeannie, there is a lot of concern at the moment among Democrats. We've talked so much about Republican members of Congress facing angry voters at town halls. But you've got Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York on the road with Bernie Sanders, trying to test the patience here of Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, of course, in the Senate, following his support for the Republican spending plan. Who's in more trouble with their constituency right now?
I think one of the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, they are getting a fairly warm reception. They were in Arizona. They've been in different parts of the country. But they are finding that a lot of the base, as opposed to talking about Elon Musk and the oligarchs that they're talking about, really want to express their anger about Chuck Schumer, as you said. And so I think this is something the Democrats are going to be contending with, because nothing is worse for a political party than losing. And the Democrats lost big, and they're fighting to figure out how to come back. But I do think this road trip that they're taking is an indication that you're starting to see some folks in the Democratic side go out there, talk to voters, and try to feel out the base to see what messaging might work and how they can get their base behind them to potentially pick up seats in some of the off-year elections and then into the midterm.
Rick, I have to ask you, though, with this discussion of Alexandra AOC then taking on Chuck Schumer at a town hall, does that create a new problem for Democrats, which is a gift to Republicans?
Well, having Bernie Sanders and AOC in Arizona is the biggest improvement in the Republican Party standing that they could possibly hope for. I mean, they're not turning out moderate voters or swing voters that make up the winning margin in that state. They're turning them off. So, if you want more Republicans to get elected, next midterms, then have that circus come to your state, because I tell you, they've done more damage to Democrats in Arizona than they did advantages. And look, I mean, Republicans are struggling too, right? This is a period of pretty significant political change. I mean, we've already had a pretty significant, transition from working class voters to the Republican column, but Democrats haven't figured out who their constituents are yet. They keep thinking they're the party of 20 years ago. I suspect they don't want to necessarily play this out publicly like they're doing, but I guess they've had no choice because the leadership of their party is just refusing to, sort of, I think, come up with a strategy that can offset some of Donald Trump's momentum right now.
We've been talking a lot about Elon Musk this hour, Rick and Jeannie, as we did on the early edition of Balance of Power, and he's wading back into politics here. Jeannie, I'll be curious to hear your thought on this, because there's an upcoming election in Wisconsin that we've got our eyes on, April 1st, a Supreme Court election in the state that has a lot of people thinking that this could be a barometer to understand where we are post-election, post-November 5th. Elon Musk is digging into this. Leading up to Election Day, the airwaves flooded by ads by Democrats as well. Here's a taste.
Attacking Social Security, cutting Medicaid and child cancer research, dismantling the Department of Education. Elon Musk is out of control. And now the power-hungry billionaire is unloading millions to buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
To buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Jeannie, he's putting up $100 for voters to sign onto a petition against what he calls activist judges, trying to get the conservative, in this case, elected. I'm curious your thoughts on Elon Musk wading into, on a financial level, politics once again here, and whether this is a race that will actually tell us anything about the American electorate.
I think it will. One of the things you're hearing from Democrats in Wisconsin when they ask themselves, why is Elon Musk so invested in this particular race? And one of the answers we're hearing is, of course, he has a case. Tesla may have a case go before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And it wasn't just days after that case was filed that he started making waves on this race on X. And so that is playing big with Democrats and maybe some moderates in Wisconsin who are deeply concerned. And when the candidate out there was asked the other day, would you recuse yourself if you win and that case comes before you? He could not answer the question. So those kinds of conflicts of interest, which seems to be the watchword of the day with Elon Musk, whether he's at the Pentagon or messing around in Wisconsin, those kinds of things are deeply concerning to the American voters. And I think we may see that resonate in Wisconsin, but we have to wait until, April 1st to see if it works.
Yeah.
A lot of questions today about Elon Musk going to the Pentagon on the same day that the new fighter jet is revealed. Question, Rick, is it going to hurt the Republican Party for Elon Musk being questioned so much about his activities and his access to information within the White House?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. So far, with some of the polling that we've seen, Elon Musk's popularity is going down. Doge popularity is going down. And that's including some Republican voters. So that's a bit of a cautionary tale. I think, too, the rhetoric is really out of control. I mean, when Elon Musk calls the Social Security Administration a Ponzi scheme, and the head of the Social Security Administration, Leland Dudick, says he's going to shut down the agency unless Doge gets your personal information. I mean, I don't know how you sell this to the general public. I mean, maybe they're trying to, cure for something within the agency, but I don't see the fraud and abuse resulting in prosecutions and convictions of people who are defrauding the agency. So I think a lot of voters are sort of scratching their head, and we see more and more of these town halls, Republican town halls in bright red states like Utah, and Wyoming, where Republicans are getting booed when Elon Musk's name comes up. So, I mean, I get that he doesn't care about his PR, but the president, the White House, and the Republican Party should start caring about it.
Well, so is that the recipe for Democrats? Jeannie, we just showed you that ad from Wisconsin. Instead of talking about the Republican candidate in this case, just go to the boogeyman, Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. It's a tried and true tactic, try to tie whoever is running to the most unpopular person and you may get a win. And, Rick just mentioned Utah. Look at what Celeste Malloy out there said the other night at the town hall. She is worried about a fear of something like sliding into authoritarianism. This is what from a Republican who was just elected in 2023. So these are deeply concerning developments on the Republican side. And, for Democrats, they're going to try to use this unpopularity. And speaking of the rhetoric, I mean, Elon Musk was also out there saying he can't wait to prosecute whoever leaked to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal that he was going to visit the Pentagon. I mean, this is not the rhetoric he should be using at all, but certainly publicly if Donald Trump wants to be popular.
Jeannie, many Democrats, though, would argue that Democrats focus too much about Trump in the 2024 election and they didn't have a solid message. So is going after Elon like this the best way to go?
Yeah, I think in the 24 election, of course, they were in power. They had the presidency. And so, attacking Trump didn't make as much sense. They are out of power now. They can lay the blame on the feet of the people in power, that is Donald Trump and Elon Musk. But I also do think it's critically important that they have an economic plan to put forward, that they talk about issues people care about. Costs, the Department of Education, there's a lot of people who are deeply concerned about what the president did there yesterday. So they do have to be able to do both things at the same time if they're going to beat the Republicans.
All right, coming up, thanks to our panelists, we're going to look ahead to the week that we have in store in politics. Many thanks to Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature panel here on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Julie Fine in Washington. Thanks for being with us as we look ahead to another busy week in Washington. Of course, they all are, but for real next week as the return of lawmakers begins on Monday. House and Senate back in town. And the focus, of course, will be back on President Trump's tax and cuts agenda with reconciliation in the mix here in a process that could last the rest of the year. The week will also begin with the next round of talks on a partial ceasefire in Ukraine. Julie, officials from the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine will gather Monday in Saudi Arabia.
And it'll be interesting to see if they can move past everything that has happened recently and really get a solid deal on the table.
Well, yes, indeed. Whether you're talking about a minerals deal, which the Secretary of Energy told us could be in the offing here, or again, that partial ceasefire, we'll let you know. Learn more in the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. We'll see you back here Monday on Bloomberg TV and radio.